We are extremely delighted to have with us Dr. Adrian Palmer from the University of Utah, where he teaches English and linguistics. He is the pop star of testing, so we are extremely delighted that he is with us. He has traveled widely. He has taught at Thailand, and he has innumerable publications to his credits. And he has also won the Outstanding Research Award for one of his publications. And Dr. Palmer, a very, very warm welcome. We are really delighted to have you with us.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Palmer, all of us test, we are the teachers, so we are also the testers. And is there such a thing as a good test, and a bad test?
That's a good question. It's one that's often asked. First, let me say that what I'll be talking to you about today is actually the result of my work with Dr. Lyle Bachman of UCLA, and together we have created the materials that I'll be discussing with you. No, I don't believe, or we don't believe, that there is such a thing as a good or a bad test. And that's even true in very specific situations. Any test has strengths and weaknesses, and there's no such thing as a test that has only strengths and no weaknesses. So really, when you design a test, you need to decide what strengths you want to emphasize and what weaknesses you can live with.
Okay.
So we're not looking for an ideal test or a perfect test. We're always looking for one that has an assortment of strengths and weaknesses that we can live with under those circumstances.
So in a sense, that is the whole business of testing is also a process where we keep improving.
That's right. Testing, you can always, every time you test, you can generally spot something or other that you might want to improve or change or adjust. And so probably no test is ever a finished product. It's always a work in progress.
But nevertheless, you would say that there is a criteria that you sort of keep in mind when you create a test.
Absolutely. In fact, we have boiled down what we keep in mind to 4 qualities of useful language tests. These are reliability, construct validity, authenticity, and desired impact. Over the years, we have thought long and hard about what makes a test a useful one. In fact, maybe combined 80 years, the two of us have thought about that. And we have found that if you work with very large numbers of different qualities of useful language tests, the system gets impossible to use. It gets difficult to remember, and it gets difficult to use the qualities precisely and to keep all of them in mind. We found that we can work with only 4, and that's all we ever work with, and that works for us.
That works, and you think it would work for a lot of our teachers. So could you define and tell us more about each of these qualities?
Sure. I'll start from the ones that are the most familiar, and then go to the ones that may be less familiar.
Yes.
The first quality is called reliability, which probably anyone who works with the test has heard of.
Yeah.
It's got a very simple definition, consistency of measurement, which means that, say I was to test these 10 people here today, test some aspect of their English ability today, and then test the same thing tomorrow using the same test. If their ability has not changed, and if they have not memorized the answers, the scores should be about the same today and tomorrow. That's all reliability is. The scores remain stable unless there's a reason for them to change.
But is there a fact, can we increase the reliability of tests?
Sure. Anything that you can do to increase the consistency of measurement or the stability of scores will increase reliability. I can give you an example. Let's say that I'm testing I'm using an oral language test, a test involving a conversation between an examiner and a test taker. And let's suppose that this test is scored by means of ratings, rating scales.
Yes. That's something like from 0 to 9 or something.
Say, 0 to 9 or a 5-point scale or
yes.
something like that. Now, if the people doing the scoring are not highly trained, in other words, if you just tell them, give this person a score from 0 to 5, their scores are likely to vary each time they score the test taker because they won't have a very specific set of criteria in mind, and they won't be able to use those consistently. On the other hand, if you have highly trained scorers, people who have been taught exactly what each of these numbers means and given practice in scoring and feedback to the point where they can repeatedly give the same score to the same kind of performance, then the scores they give are likely to be more consistent or reliable than the scores given by the untrained raters.
So it is very important to train the raters.
Absolutely. You need to train the raters. There are other things you can do to improve reliability. You can make the instructions more explicit and more consistent. So that every time you give the test takers get exactly the same instructions, and they know, and these instructions are not ambiguous. They're clear, and the test takers know what to do. That would mean that a person that took the test today and tomorrow would hear the same instructions and know exactly what to do both times. That would tend to increase the reliability.
Okay. Then you talked about construct validity, right?
Sure. But I could add one more thing about reliability before we move on. Another well-known way to increase reliability is to make a test longer.
Yes.
So all other things being equal, a longer test is going to be more reliable than a shorter test. And I could give you an example. Suppose I'm giving a listening test. And suppose that test has only 3 items. And the test takers hear something and they answer some question. Then they hear something else and they answer a question 3 times. Now suppose that during one of the questions a plane flies overhead and there's a lot of noise. You have lost 1/3 of the information on that test. So if the person took the same test today and tomorrow, 1/3 of the information would be different on those 2 days, and the scores would be quite different on the 2 days. On the other hand, if you have 100 questions and the plane flies overhead, you only lose 1/100th of the information. Therefore, the scores today and tomorrow are more consistent than they would be with a shorter test. And it's people who work with tests know how to estimate the increases in reliability that come with increased numbers of items.
Okay. So that's very important to keep these factors in mind where reliability is concerned.
It's important to try to make the instructions as clear as possible, to make the test as long as possible consistent with practicality considerations.
Yes, of course.
To make what the test taker hears every time or what they see every time the same, and so on. Just to try to keep all parts of the test as consistent as possible across multiple administrations.
Okay, so let's go on to the next useful criteria that you have, which is...
Right. The next quality of usefulness is called construct validity. Construct validity is the meaningfulness of the interpretations that we make on the basis of test scores. Now, suppose I tell you that this individual got an 80% on a given test. All you have is a number, but you have no way to interpret what that number means. 80% of what? What is the test measuring? So construct validity is the ability to assign a very specific interpretation to a score. or a meaning. Now, in order to assign a meaning to a score, you need to start with a clear definition of the ability that the test is designed to measure.
So we cannot say something like, okay, we are measuring speaking ability or the writing ability. Can we do that?
Well, that's a good question. Often I ask a group of teachers, if I say, suppose I tell you that this test measures speaking ability, and then I ask them, think about what speaking means to you. And then they have some time to think about it. Then I ask them to tell me what speaking means to them. I will generally get 15 or 20 different answers.
Yes.
So if I simply tell you that this is a speaking test and leave it up to you to figure out what speaking means, your interpretation of speaking is going to be different from another person's interpretation of speaking.
Yeah.
Therefore, the test will lack construct validity. You will be assigning different meanings to the same performance.
Yes. For instance, I may imagine that 80% is where stress and intonation is concerned, and somebody else may imagine that it is fluency, perhaps, or some other, or accuracy, or whatever.
That's right. It could. Some may think fluency, others accuracy, vocabulary use, grammar, pronunciation, intonation. All of those are reasonable interpretations.
Absolutely.
But the problem is that they're all different. And so you need to start off with a clear definition of exactly how the scores are to be interpreted.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the first requirement for construct validity. Now there's another requirement, and that is the test task, which is what the test taker does in taking the test, must allow the test taker to demonstrate the ability that you have defined in the construct. So if you suppose you have defined a construct as control of rhetorical organization in writing. So this test is measuring the ability to organize one's writing.
Okay.
Now, you would want to give them a writing task that was long enough for, you would want to give them enough time so they could actually use their knowledge of rhetorical organization to organize what they had written. If you only give them a short amount of time, they may actually be quite capable of organizing what they write, but they simply may not have enough time to do so. So there needs to be a good fit between the construct, which is the definition of what it is we're trying to measure, and the task, which is what the test taker does to demonstrate that ability.
But, when we talk about organizational ability, for instance, but along with that, the vocabulary could be tested, the syntax, the correctness of the syntax could be corrected. All those factors would also come into play, wouldn't it?
They would. And this is one of the big problems or just situations that we face in testing language. When we're testing one aspect of language knowledge, for example, other parts of language knowledge get used at the same time.
Yes.
So really the scores are influenced by more than what one is actually looking at.
Yes.
However, what we do is we construct our scoring to be sensitive to what we want to measure.
All right.
But we have to realize that other parts of the language are influencing the performance of the test taker. But the construct that we are trying to measure is the basis for our constructing our scoring. So in the composition example, the person does write a composition, and of course they're using knowledge of grammar and vocabulary and rhetorical organization.
And world knowledge as well.
And world knowledge as well, topical knowledge, exactly. But what we do is we construct our scoring rating scales to focus on rhetorical organization.
Yes.
So they may only ask us to look at, is there a thesis statement? Are there topic sentences, you know, and so on and so on, and we may specify what we mean by rhetorical organization. So we don't actually have anything in the rating scales that says grammar or vocabulary or what have you. The rating scales only point to rhetorical organization, but the other parts are there.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get on to the other factors, authenticity.
Sure. The other qualities of
Yes,
usefulness.
yeah.
So far we've talked about reliability and construct validity. The third quality of usefulness is authenticity. We define authenticity as the degree of correspondence between the characteristics of a test task and the characteristics of a non-test language use task. Now, there are a lot of words there, and that's kind of hard to make sense of the first time you hear that definition, but I can give you a simpler way to think of it. A test task which is reasonably authentic is one in which what the test taker does in the test looks somewhat like what they would be doing with the language outside of the test.
Okay.
So if, let's take the example of someone who's working on in a phone bank in India, and their job is to interact with customers from all over the world in English and answer questions about something.
The call center.
A call center, exactly,
yes.
a call center. Now, if you want to test their knowledge of English, and you do so by providing a simulated conversation between this person and someone calling in, that the person taking that test would say, well, yes, the test task is a lot like what I'm using the language for.
True.
So in that case, you would have a reasonably authentic test task because it would be similar to what the test taker knows he or she will be using the language for. Similarly, if you have a student in a classroom and they have been using certain instructional tasks to learn an aspect of English or some language, then you test them using test tasks which resemble in some ways the instructional task. The test taker or the student is likely to say, yes, that's reasonable to test me that way. That's how I was taught. So again, you have two tasks always. You have the test task, and then you have the other task, which the test taker knows they will be performing with the language outside of the testing situation.
So that also gives you learner readiness or test readiness. So you know what to expect in a test. It doesn't come as a total surprise to you.
Precisely. If you have reasonably authentic test tasks, then the general reaction of the test taker will be, yeah, that's reasonable. That's what I'm prepared for, and I don't feel like now I've been suddenly given something clear out of the blue that I've never even thought about before.
Yeah, and which is totally unfair to do such a thing.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly going to make them feel uncomfortable. And also, if you are looking, for example, at a specific aspect of language ability, say knowledge of grammar, and you ask them to demonstrate that in a task totally unlike anything they've ever performed before, the chances you're not going to get a very good measure of grammar either.
Yes.
I mean, you ask a person in a call center to and they're used to answering questions about computer problems, and then you all of a sudden ask them to write a composition on on hydroelectric power. You know, it's just not relevant, and they may not be able to write a very good composition, and their grammar might not look very good. But because they're not used to doing that.
Yeah, but that happens quite often. This sort of thing happens quite often. You give a test task which is so very different from, so the students are just not prepared for it.
That's right.
So this is a factor which our teachers should take into consideration. I know that somebody at one point, because they wanted things simpler, they gave a close without getting the students ready for the close.
Right.
And those students just couldn't manage close. Even to mark somebody on the close, you have to get them ready for it in a sense.
Yes, because a closed test is not something that you normally encounter.
Absolutely.
And unless it's been used in instruction as a kind of instructional task,
Yeah.
and students are prepared for it, it's going to probably not look like anything they've ever seen before.
Yes.
Right.
You've also talked about impact, right?
Yes. Desired impact, the fourth quality of usefulness. Yeah. When we give or use a test, doing so impacts both individuals, such as teachers or students, and systems, such as an instructional system like a curriculum or a syllabus or even an institution. So when we construct a test, we really need to start off with what we want the desired impact of that test to be. And we need to ask ourselves, how do we want this test to impact or affect individuals such as students or teachers? For example, some tests that we give, for example, as in the course of instruction, are designed to get students to study more. So
Yes.
That is an aspect of desired impact which may be used in, say, a formative test used as part of a curriculum.
Yes.
A test can also be used to impact the way what teachers teach. You know, it's well known, in fact, that teachers will often teach to the test.
Yes.
And that can be either desired or not desired. Ideally, teaching to the test ought to be desired. That way, the test is going to seem to be relevant to what is being taught. So, if you design a test with the instruction, knowing what kind of instruction the test takers are supposed to be given, then the test can actually influence the way teachers teach in ways that you would like them to be influenced.
Yeah, but there is a lot of, heart searching and heart burning about this fact that teachers just teach to the examination. They're so keen that their students do well. So they do not want to go outside the syllabus. They don't want to do interesting things because they want to teach to the examination. So what do you think about this? Should teachers not go beyond the syllabus, to go beyond, to go outside in a sense?
I think that the challenge is to create an examination in which teaching to the examination will actually cause the teachers or influence them to use instructional materials and activities which are desirable, which will produce learning. The problem is when you create a test in which teaching to the test is not consistent with good educational practice, then you have the impact of the test becoming negative.
Yes, yes.
For example, let's say that for convenience sake, you design a test in which the test tasks are all distinct from one another, and there is no context provided, and they are designed solely because the test tasks are easy to construct and easy to correct. Teaching to that kind of a test may not involve the teachers using instructional activities which are well known to be conducive to learning. It may just involve more rote memorization of decontextualized material. So the students who study to pass that kind of a test may not be studying anything that is very helpful in any kind of authentic language use task. I think there's where tests get a bad rap or a bad reputation.
Yes.
It's when the tests have been designed without considering what the impact on instruction is likely to be if teachers teach to that.
Yes. So, in a sense, the test should also therefore be a washback to the teaching. So the teachers should also, you did mention that it impacts the teachers as well.
Yes.
And the teaching learning process. So it should tell you something about the teaching learning process. A good test would do that, wouldn't it?
It would. And when test takers either collaborate closely with teachers or when the teachers themselves have a heavy stake in designing the test, you tend to get tests which are in good alignment with the curriculum and the instruction. That's a good argument for having teachers be a central part of the test design process, so that you don't have people designing tests who have no interaction with the people most closely affected by that test, namely the teachers of the students.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
It was indeed very, very useful, this discussion. And I think now our teachers do know when they create their tests that they should keep this 4 criteria in mind. And when we get feedback, we will let you know, Dr. Palmer. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.